The winter storm hit Eureka, California, with a fury that hadn't been seen in decades, and Violet Emerson was running out of time as her horse stumbled on the ice-slicked mountain trail, sending her scrambling up a cliff face where she now clung frozen and terrified 20 feet above the rocky ground below. She had left town 3 hours earlier, determined to reach her father's mining claim before the weather turned. The stubborn streak that made her ignore the warnings from the general store owner now seemed like pure foolishness as her fingers went numb inside her leather gloves. The wind howled through the pines, carrying snow so thick she could barely see beyond her own trembling hands. Her mare had bolted when the lightning cracked overhead, leaving Violet stranded on this narrow ledge with nowhere to go but down. The year was 1882, and women did not often travel alone through the Sierra Nevada mountains, but Violet had never been one to follow convention. At 23 years old, she had inherited her mother's determination and her father's love of the wild country. Now that determination might be what killed her. She pressed herself against the frozen rock face, feeling the ice beneath her boots begin to crack. Her dark hair whipped around her face, and she tried to call for help, but the wind stole her voice before it could carry more than a few feet. Wade Morrison had been tracking the wild Mustang herd for 2 days when the storm rolled in. At 26, he had spent the better part of his life working ranches across California and Nevada, building a reputation as a man who could ride anything with 4 legs and break horses without breaking their spirit. He had saved enough money to start thinking about his own spread, maybe settling down somewhere with good water and better grazing. The Mustangs represented a solid payday if he could capture and gentle them, but the storm changed everything. He guided his gelding down from the higher elevations, looking for shelter in the network of caves he knew dotted these mountains. That was when he heard it, a sound so faint he almost missed it beneath the roar of the wind. A cry for help, distant and desperate. Wade pulled his horse to a stop and listened, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. There it was again, coming from somewhere up the rocky slope to his left. Without hesitation, he turned his mount toward the sound and pushed forward through the deepening snow. The temperature had dropped viciously in the last hour, and he knew anyone caught out in this weather without shelter would not last long. His gelding fought him, wanting to find cover, but Wade urged him on with gentle pressure and soft words. He had always been better with animals than people, finding an honest simplicity in their needs and fears. The cliff face emerged from the swirling white like a gray ghost. Wade dismounted and secured his horse behind a thick stand of pines that offered some protection from the wind. He scanned the rocks above and felt his heart slam against his ribs when he spotted her. A woman in a dark coat clinging to a ledge about 20 feet up, her body pressed against the ice-covered stone. Even from this distance, he could see she was in serious trouble. "Hold on," he shouted, cupping his hands around his mouth. "I am coming up." Violet heard the voice and felt a surge of hope so intense it nearly made her sob. She tried to look down but could not risk shifting her weight. The ledge beneath her right foot had started to crumble, tiny pieces of rock and ice falling away into the void below. "Please hurry," she called back, hating how small and scared her voice sounded. Wade assessed the cliff with the practiced eye of a man who had spent years working in rough country. The rock face was slick with ice, and the handholds were few and treacherous. Under normal conditions, it would be a challenging climb. In this storm, it bordered on suicidal. He shrugged out of his heavy coat and pulled his rope from the saddle, knowing the extra weight would only slow him down. The cold hit him immediately, but he would need full mobility for what came next. He found his first handhold and pulled himself up, testing each grip, before trusting it with his full weight. The ice made everything unpredictable. His fingers ached within seconds, the cold leaching feeling from his extremities. He forced himself to move methodically, finding purchase in cracks and crevices, using his boots to kick through the ice and reach solid rock beneath. 10 feet up, his left hand slipped and he swung out from the cliff face, catching himself with his right hand while his legs scrambled for support. Pain shot through his shoulder, but he gritted his teeth and kept climbing. Violet watched his progress with her heart in her throat. She could see him clearly now, a tall man with dark hair plastered to his head by the snow, his face set in concentration as he worked his way up the treacherous cliff. He moved with a confidence that gave her hope, but she could also see how dangerous each movement was, how easily he could fall. "What is your name?" His voice reached her between gusts of wind. He was closer now, maybe 8 feet below her position. "Violet," she answered, her teeth chattering so hard she could barely form the word. "Violet Emerson." "I am Wade Morrison," he called back, pulling himself up another few feet. "When I reach you, I need you to trust me completely. Can you do that?" She nodded, then realized he might not see the gesture. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I can." Wade hauled himself up the last section and finally reached the ledge where Violet stood frozen. It was even narrower than it had looked from below, barely wide enough for one person, let alone two. He positioned himself carefully, bracing his feet against the most solid section he could find. Up close, he could see how badly she was shaking, her lips tinged blue with cold, her eyes wide with fear and exhaustion. She was beautiful even in her terror, with delicate features and eyes the color of spring grass. The thought came unbidden and he pushed it aside, focusing on the problem at hand. "We need to get you down from here," he said, keeping his voice calm and steady. "The ledge will not hold much longer." "I know," Violet whispered. "I tried to move, but my legs will not work properly. I think I have been up here too long." Wade understood immediately. The cold had sapped her strength and coordination. If he tried to have her climb down on her own, she would likely fall. "I am going to carry you," he said, meeting her eyes. "It will not be easy, but I have done harder things." "You cannot," Violet protested weakly. "It is too dangerous." "You could fall." "We will both fall if we stay here," Wade said, and the simple truth of it left no room for argument. He pulled his rope from where he had secured it around his waist and tied it quickly around them both, creating a makeshift harness that would keep them together. "Put your arms around my neck and hold on as tight as you can. Do not let go no matter what happens." Violet did as he instructed, wrapping her arms around his neck and feeling the solid strength of him beneath the wet fabric of his shirt. He was warm despite the cold, and she could feel the steady beat of his heart against her chest. Wade secured her against him, then carefully turned to face the cliff wall. "Close your eyes if you need to," he said softly, then began the descent. The climb down was a nightmare of slipping holds and near misses. Wade could barely feel his hands anymore, operating on muscle memory and sheer determination. Violet's weight threw off his balance, but he compensated, moving with exquisite care. Twice he lost his footing, and they swung out from the rock face, held only by his white-knuckled grip on a single handhold. Violet buried her face against his neck and held on, feeling every strain of his muscles as he fought to keep them both alive. 15 feet from the ground, Wade's right hand slipped completely. They dropped several inches before he caught them with his left hand, his shoulder screaming in protest. Violet gasped but did not cry out, tightening her grip around his neck. Wade found a new foothold and continued down, inch by agonizing inch. His arms shook with fatigue and cold, but he did not stop. He could not stop. When his feet finally touched solid ground, Wade's legs nearly buckled. He lowered Violet carefully, making sure she could stand before releasing the rope that bound them. She swayed and he caught her, steadying her against the wind that still howled around them. "We need shelter," he said, his voice rough with exhaustion. "Can you ride?" Violet nodded, though she was not entirely sure she could. Wade retrieved his coat and wrapped it around her shoulders, then led her to where his gelding waited. He helped her mount, then swung up behind her, pulling her back against his chest. The horse needed no urging to move, heading immediately for lower ground and the promise of shelter. They rode for what felt like hours, but was probably less than 30 minutes. Wade knew these mountains well enough to find the cave even in the blinding snow. It was not large, but it was deep enough to provide real shelter, and someone had left a stack of firewood in the back from a previous visit. He dismounted and helped Violet down, noting with concern that she could barely walk on her own. Inside the cave, Wade worked quickly to build a fire. His hands were clumsy with cold, but he had started fires in worse conditions. The wood was dry and caught quickly, sending blessed warmth into the small space. Violet collapsed near the flames, shaking so violently she could not speak. Wade removed his saddle and gear from his horse, then took off the animal's bridle and rubbed him down with handfuls of dry grass from the cave floor. Only when the gelding was settled did he turn his attention to Violet. She had not moved from where she sat, staring into the fire with unfocused eyes. "Violet," he said gently, crouching beside her, "you need to get out of those wet clothes. Do you have anything dry?" She shook her head slowly. "My saddlebags," she whispered, "on my horse." She ran off when the lightning came. Wade cursed softly. He pulled his spare shirt from his saddlebags and handed it to her. "Put this on. I will turn around to give you privacy, but you need to do it now. You are showing signs of serious cold exposure." Violet took the shirt with trembling fingers and Wade turned his back, feeding more wood to the fire. He heard her struggle with her buttons, heard the rustle of fabric as she changed. When she told him it was safe, he turned back to find her swimming in his oversized shirt, her wet clothes spread near the fire to dry. She looked impossibly young and vulnerable, and he felt something shift in his chest. He sat down beside her and pulled a blanket from his bedroll, wrapping it around her shoulders. "Better?" "Yes," Violet said, though her teeth still chattered. "Thank you. You saved my life." "What were you doing out here in this weather?" Wade asked, rubbing his own arms to restore circulation. "No one with sense travels these mountains when a storm is coming." Violet managed a weak smile. "My father always said I had more determination than sense. He has a mining claim about 5 miles north of here. I was bringing him supplies. I thought I could beat the storm." "Your father is James Emerson?" Wade asked, recognizing the name. "I met him in town a few weeks back. Good man. He is probably worried sick about you." "I know," Violet said miserably, "but there is nothing we can do until this storm passes." She looked at Wade properly for the first time, taking in his strong features and steady gray eyes. "You nearly died climbing that cliff to reach me. Why would you risk your life for a stranger?" Wade was quiet for a moment, poking at the fire with a stick. "I guess I could not do anything else," he said finally. "Leaving you there was not an option I could live with." Something in the simple honesty of his words made Violet's eyes sting with tears. "What were you doing out here?" "Are you a prospector too?" "Horse hunter," Wade said. "There is a Mustang herd in these mountains that I have been tracking. I was planning to catch a few and break them, sell them to the army post or one of the big ranches, but I think they will have to wait." He flexed his hands, which were raw and bleeding from the climb. "Might need a few days before I can hold a rope again anyway." Without thinking, Violet reached out and took his hands in hers, examining the damage. His palms were torn up badly with deep scrapes from the sharp rocks. "This needs to be cleaned," she said. "Do you have water?" Wade nodded toward his canteen. Violet fetched it along with a clean cloth from his saddlebags. She worked carefully, cleaning the wounds as gently as she could. Wade watched her bent head, the way the firelight caught in her dark hair, now drying in waves around her face. Her touch was tender, and he found himself acutely aware of her presence, the way her shoulder brushed against his as she worked. "I am sorry," she murmured when he winced. "I know it must hurt." "I have had worse," Wade said, which was true but did not make it hurt any less. "Comes with the work." "You must think I am terribly foolish," Violet said, finishing with his hands and moving to examine a cut on his forearm that he had not even noticed. "Rushing off into a storm like that." "I think you are brave," Wade said, and meant it. "Maybe a bit reckless, but brave. Not many women would attempt that journey alone." Violet looked up at him, surprised by the admiration in his voice. Their faces were close, separated by only a few inches. She could see flecks of blue in his gray eyes, could feel the warmth of his breath. Something electric passed between them, a connection that felt both sudden and inevitable. Wade cleared his throat and pulled back slightly. "You should rest," he said. "We will be here until the storm passes, which could be a while. You need to recover your strength." Violet nodded, though she found she did not want to move away from him. Instead, she settled back against the saddle he positioned for her, the blanket wrapped tight around her shoulders. Wade added more wood to the fire and then sat nearby, close enough to provide warmth but maintaining a respectful distance. Outside, the storm raged on. Inside the cave, the fire crackled, and the two of them sat in companionable silence, each aware of the other in ways that had nothing to do with the cold or danger. Violet found her eyes growing heavy despite her best efforts to stay awake. The warmth of the fire and the exhaustion from her ordeal finally caught up with her. Wade watched as her breathing evened out into sleep. He should try to rest too, but instead, he found himself studying her face in the firelight. There was a strength in her features, a determined set to her jaw even in sleep. She had not panicked on that ledge, had not fought him when he needed her to trust him completely. That took real courage. He thought about her father waiting at his claim, probably out of his mind with worry by now. James Emerson struck Wade as the protective type, the kind of father who would not take kindly to his daughter being stuck in a cave with a strange man overnight. Not that Wade had improper intentions, but he knew how these things could look. Violet's reputation could suffer just from this situation, innocent as it was. The wind shifted and snow blew into the mouth of the cave, making the fire flicker. Wade moved closer to the entrance and used rocks and branches to build a partial barrier, blocking the worst of the wind while still allowing smoke to escape. When he finished, his hands throbbed painfully and he flexed them carefully, hoping he had not done any permanent damage. "You should sleep too," Violet's voice came softly from behind him. He turned to find her watching him, her eyes reflecting the firelight. "I will," Wade said, returning to his spot near the fire. "Just wanted to make sure we stay warm through the night. The temperature is still dropping." Violet sat up, pulling the blanket around her shoulders. "I cannot stop thinking about what could have happened if you had not come along when you did." "But I did," Wade interrupted gently. "No sense dwelling on what did not happen." "Still," Violet persisted, "I owe you a debt I can never repay. You risked everything for me." Wade shook his head. "You do not owe me anything. Any decent man would have done the same." "That is not true, and you know it," Violet said with surprising firmness. "There are plenty of men who would have ridden past, told themselves it was not their problem. You did not hesitate. I saw you from that ledge. You barely stopped to think before you started climbing." Wade felt uncomfortable with her praise. "I just did what needed doing." They fell silent again, but it was a different kind of silence now, charged with things unspoken. Violet drew her knees up to her chest, wrapping her arms around them. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "You have family around here. Someone who will be worried about you." Wade shook his head. "My parents died when I was young. I have been on my own since I was 15. No wife, no children, just me and whatever horse I am riding at the time." The loneliness in those words made Violet's heart ache. "That sounds like a hard life." "It has its moments," Wade admitted. "But it has its freedoms too. I go where I want, work when I want, answer to nobody but myself." "Do you ever wish for something different?" Violet asked. "A home, people to come back to." Wade was quiet for a long moment. "Sometimes," he said finally. "Lately more than usual. I am getting to an age where riding from job to job is starting to lose its appeal. I have been thinking about buying some land, starting a small ranch. Nothing fancy, just a place of my own." "What is stopping you?" "Money, mostly," Wade said with a wry smile. "Land costs plenty, and a man needs capital to get started properly. Those Mustangs I was tracking, they would have gone a long way toward making my dream a reality. But there will be other herds, other opportunities." Violet studied him in the firelight. "You are not like the other cowboys I have met," she said. "Most of them are content to drift forever, spending their money on whiskey and cards. You have ambition, goals. That is rare." "And what about you?" Wade asked, turning the conversation. "What do you want from life?" Violet considered the question seriously. "I want to matter," she said. "I want to do something meaningful. My mother died when I was young, and my father raised me to be independent, to think for myself. But sometimes I feel trapped by what people expect from me. Women are supposed to marry, keep house, have babies. There is nothing wrong with that, but I want more. I want to see things, do things, make my own choices." "That is why you were riding out to your father's claim alone," Wade said, understanding. "You were proving something." "Maybe," Violet admitted. "Or maybe I am just stubborn and foolish like everyone says." "You are not foolish," Wade said firmly. "Bold, determined, maybe a bit too independent for your own good sometimes, but not foolish." Violet smiled, and Wade felt that sensation in his chest again, like something loosening and tightening at the same time. He had known this woman for only a few hours, but already she fascinated him in ways he could not fully explain. There was a brightness to her, an intensity that drew him like a moth to flame. The night wore on, and they talked, sharing stories and dreams in the flickering firelight. Wade told her about his travels, about the horses he had known and the places he had seen. Violet spoke of her childhood in Eureka, of her dreams to maybe start a school or learn photography. The conversation flowed easily, naturally, as if they had known each other for years instead of hours. At some point, Violet's eyes grew heavy again, and she nodded off mid-sentence. Wade gently eased her back against the saddle and made sure the blanket covered her completely. He watched her sleep for a while, thinking about the strange turn his life had taken. This morning he had been alone, focused on capturing horses and making money. Now he sat in a cave with a woman who made his heart race in ways he had not felt in years, maybe ever. He finally allowed himself to sleep, sitting upright near the fire so he could wake easily if the flames needed tending. His last thought before drifting off was that he needed to get Violet safely to her father, no matter how much he might wish the storm would last forever. Wade woke to silence. The wind had died down, and the constant howl that had been the soundtrack to the night was gone. He carefully added wood to the fire, which had burned low, then moved to the cave entrance. Dawn was breaking over the mountains, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of pink and gold. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world transformed by white. Behind him, he heard Violet stirring. She sat up, blinking in confusion before remembering where she was. "Is it over?" she asked, her voice still rough with sleep. "The storm passed," Wade confirmed, "but there is at least 2 feet of fresh snow out there. It will be slow going." Violet stood and came to join him at the entrance, Wade's shirt still hanging loosely on her frame, her own clothes now dry by the fire. She gasped at the beauty of the transformed landscape. "It is incredible," she breathed. "And dangerous," Wade added. "We will need to take our time getting down to flatter ground. The snow will hide all kinds of hazards." Violet nodded, understanding the gravity of what lay ahead. "My father," she said suddenly. "He must be frantic." "We will get you to him," Wade promised. "But first you need to eat something and get into your own clothes. We have a hard ride ahead of us." They ate a simple breakfast of jerky and hardtack from Wade's supplies, washed down with cold water from the canteen. Violet changed back into her own clothes, now dry and stiff from the fire's heat. Wade saddled his gelding and they prepared to leave the shelter that had kept them safe through the storm. The journey down the mountain was treacherous. Wade's horse moved carefully through the deep snow, each step measured and cautious. Wade kept one arm around Violet's waist, holding her secure in the saddle in front of him. The contact felt natural now, comfortable in a way that surprised them both. They spoke little, concentrating on navigating the dangerous terrain, but Violet found herself hyper-aware of his presence, his strength, the steady beat of his heart against her back. It took them 3 hours to reach James Emerson's mining claim. The small cabin was nestled in a hollow, smoke rising from the chimney. Before they could dismount, the door flew open and James rushed out, his weathered face a mixture of relief and fury. "Violet," he shouted, pulling her from the horse almost before it stopped moving. "Where have you been?" "I have been out of my mind with worry." "I am sorry, Papa," Violet said, hugging him tight. "The storm caught me on the trail. I would have died if Wade had not found me." James Emerson pulled back and looked at his daughter, then at the young cowboy who sat quietly on his horse. He took in Wade's torn hands, the exhaustion evident in his face, the protective way he had been holding Violet. "What happened?" James demanded, his voice hard. Wade dismounted and stood respectfully before the older man. "Your daughter was trapped on a cliff ledge when I found her. The storm was bad and she was suffering from the cold. I got her down and we sheltered in a cave until it passed. Nothing improper happened, sir. I give you my word." James studied Wade for a long moment, his miner's instincts reading the truth in the young man's face. He saw the injuries, the signs of hard climbing, the genuine respect in Wade's eyes. He also saw the way his daughter looked at this stranger, the way she had instinctively moved closer to him even while hugging her father. "You saved her life," James said finally, his voice rough with emotion. He extended his hand. "I am in your debt, young man, James Emerson." "Wade Morrison," Wade said, shaking the offered hand despite the pain in his palm. "No debt necessary. I did what anyone would do." "Come inside," James insisted. "Both of you. You look half frozen, and those hands need proper tending." Inside the small but cozy cabin, James fussed over his daughter while his wife Martha, who had arrived 2 days before to wait out the storm with her husband, tended to Wade's injuries with more skill than Violet had managed. Martha was a practical woman in her late 40s, with kind eyes and capable hands. She cleaned and bandaged Wade's wounds while James made coffee and heated up stew from the night before. Over the meal, they recounted the full story of what had happened. Martha exclaimed in horror at the dangerous climb, while James grew increasingly impressed with Wade's courage and skill. Violet found herself watching Wade as he spoke, noting the modest way he downplayed his own bravery, focusing instead on luck and timing. "You will stay here tonight," James declared when the story was finished. "You are in no condition to ride, and it is the least we can do." Wade started to protest, but Martha cut him off. "He is right. Those hands need another day of healing before you should be working. Besides, we would like to get to know the man who saved our daughter." So Wade stayed. As the day progressed, he found himself drawn into the warm domesticity of the Emerson family. James showed him around the mining operation, explaining his techniques and hopes for the claim. Martha kept pressing food on him, insisting he needed to recover his strength. And Violet stayed close, helping her mother prepare dinner, but always aware of where Wade was, what he was doing. That evening after dinner, James invited Wade to sit on the cabin's small porch with him. The older man packed tobacco into his pipe and lit it, taking a few thoughtful puffs before speaking. "My daughter has always been headstrong," James said. "Takes after her mother that way, but she is also precious to me, the most important thing in my life. Today I almost lost her." "I understand," Wade said quietly. "Do you?" James asked, fixing Wade with a penetrating stare. "Because I have seen the way you look at her, and more importantly, I have seen the way she looks at you. I may be old, but I am not blind." Wade felt heat rise in his face. "Sir, I have nothing but respect for your daughter. I would never—" "I know," James interrupted. "I can see that. You are a good man, Wade Morrison, but you are also a drifter, a man with no roots. My daughter deserves stability, a home, a future." "You are right," Wade said, his voice heavy. "I have nothing to offer her. I will leave tomorrow, and you have my word I will not trouble her again." James puffed on his pipe, studying the younger man. "That is not quite what I said. I said she deserves those things. I did not say you could not provide them." Wade looked up, confused. "You told Martha you were saving money to buy land to start a ranch," James continued. "Is that true?" "Yes, sir, but I am nowhere near having enough yet." "What if I could help with that?" James asked. "This claim is starting to pay off, not spectacularly but steady. I have been looking for a good investment, something that would provide security for Violet's future. A working ranch with a good man running it, that would be exactly the kind of investment I am looking for." Wade stared at him. "Sir, I cannot take your money." "It would not be charity," James said firmly. "It would be a business arrangement. You provide the expertise and the labor, I provide the capital. We would be partners. And if, in the course of running this ranch, you were to court my daughter properly, with her consent of course, well, that would be between the two of you." Wade's heart was pounding. "Why would you do this? You barely know me." "I know enough," James said. "I know you risked your life for a stranger. I know you kept my daughter safe and treated her with honor when many men would not have. I know you have ambition and skill. And I know that look in Violet's eyes, the same look her mother had when she met me. That is not something to be dismissed lightly." Inside the cabin, Violet pretended to help her mother with the dishes while straining to hear the conversation on the porch. Martha smiled knowingly but said nothing, letting her daughter work through her feelings in her own way. "What do you think, Mama?" Violet finally asked. "About Wade, I mean." "I think he is a good man who did an extraordinarily brave thing," Martha said carefully. "I also think you care for him more than you probably should, given you just met him." Violet felt her cheeks burn. "Is it that obvious?" "Only to someone who knows you well," Martha said gently. "But darling, you need to be careful. He is a cowboy, a wanderer. Men like that do not usually settle down." "But what if he wanted to?" Violet asked. "What if he is looking for a reason to stay?" Martha dried her hands and turned to face her daughter. "Then that would be a different story entirely. But you need to be sure, Violet. Your heart is precious, not something to be given lightly." "I know," Violet said softly. But Mama, when he was carrying me down that cliff when we were in the cave, I felt something I have never felt before. Like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Is that foolish?" Martha smiled and stroked her daughter's hair. "Not foolish, just young. Love can feel sudden and overwhelming, but it is the long term that matters. Time will tell what this is between you two." On the porch, Wade and James were shaking hands. "I will think about your offer," Wade said. "It is generous beyond belief, but I need to make sure I am doing this for the right reasons." "The right reasons?" James asked. "I need to know I am not accepting your help just because of Violet," Wade said honestly. "That would not be fair to any of us. If I am going to be your partner, it has to be because I can run a successful ranch and give you a good return on your investment." James nodded approvingly. "That is exactly the kind of thinking I hope to hear. Take your time, think it over. But Wade, let me be clear about one thing. My offer stands regardless of what happens between you and Violet. If you court her and it does not work out, we would still be business partners. I am not trying to buy you as a son-in-law. I am investing in a man I believe in." Those words meant more to Wade than James probably knew. He had been on his own for so long, relying only on himself, trusted by few and trusting fewer. To have someone believe in him, to see his potential, was a gift he had not expected. The next morning, Wade prepared to leave. His hands were still sore but much improved thanks to Martha's care. James had drawn him a map showing prime ranch land in the valley below Eureka, parcels that were available for the right price. They had spent the morning going over numbers and plans, and Wade's head was spinning with possibilities. Violet walked him to his horse, her heart heavy despite the promise of future meetings. "When will I see you again?" she asked, then immediately felt foolish for sounding so desperate. Wade turned to face her, his gray eyes serious. "I need to go to town, check on those land parcels your father mentioned. Get the lay of the land, so to speak. But Violet, I need you to understand something. If I accept your father's offer, if I stay in this area, I want to do it right. That means courting you properly, not rushing into anything. You deserve that. And if I do not want to wait," Violet asked boldly. A smile tugged at Wade's lips. "Then you will have to be patient anyway. I have never done this before, never met anyone who made me want to stay in one place. I need time to figure out how to be the kind of man worthy of you." Violet stepped closer, looking up at him. "You already are," she said softly. "You saved my life. You treated me with respect and kindness. You made me feel safe. What more could I ask for?" "A future," Wade said, reaching out to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, the gesture achingly tender. "A real future, not just a romantic notion born from danger and gratitude. Your mother warned you about this, did she not? About not confusing rescue with love." "She did," Violet admitted. "But what I feel is not gratitude, Wade. Or if it is gratitude mixed with something much deeper. I have never felt this way before." "Neither have I," Wade confessed. "That is why I need to do this right. Give me 2 weeks to sort out the business with your father, to get started on building something real. Then I will come calling properly, with flowers and everything." "Can you give me that time?" Violet wanted to say no, wanted to beg him to stay, but she recognized the wisdom in his words. 2 weeks, she agreed. "But Wade, please know that I will be thinking of you every day." He smiled then, a real smile that transformed his serious face. "I will be thinking of you too, every moment." James and Martha watched from the cabin porch as Wade mounted his horse. He touched his hat in farewell and rode off down the mountain, his back straight despite his injuries. Violet stood watching until he disappeared from view, then turned to find her parents both smiling at her. "He will be back," James said confidently. "That is a man who keeps his word." "And when he does," Martha added, You need to be certain of your feelings. This is your life, your choice. We support you, but we cannot make this decision for you. Violet nodded, understanding the weight of what they were saying. But in her heart, she already knew. The 2 weeks that followed were the longest of her life. Wade threw himself into work with an intensity that surprised even him. He rode into Eureka and met with the land office, examining deeds and surveys for the parcels James had identified. He visited each property, walking the land, checking water sources, imagining what could be built there. One property in particular caught his attention: 160 acres with good grass, a year-round creek, and a southern exposure that would mean less snow in winter. It was perfect. He sent a telegram to James with details and received an enthusiastic response along with authorization to make an offer. 3 days of negotiations later, Wade was the majority owner of his own land, with James holding a partnership interest. The reality of it left him stunned. After years of drifting, he finally had roots, a place to build something lasting. But the land was just the beginning. Wade spent his days planning, sketching rough layouts for a house and barn, calculating costs for materials and livestock. He worked from dawn until well after dark, driven by a vision of the future he wanted to build. And at the center of that vision, whether he admitted it or not, was Violet. In the cabin at the mining claim, Violet was equally restless. She helped her mother with the endless chores, visited her father at the mine entrance, and tried to focus on the book she was reading. But her thoughts constantly drifted to Wade. She wondered what he was doing, whether he was thinking of her, whether he would really come back. Martha watched her daughter pace and fret with sympathetic amusement. "You are making yourself miserable," she observed on the 10th day. "Why do you not go into town? Visit some friends, get a change of scenery?" Violet shook her head. "What if he comes while I am gone?" "Then he will wait," Martha said practically. "Besides, your father and I need to head into Eureka for supplies tomorrow anyway. You should come with us. We can make a day of it." Reluctantly, Violet agreed. The next morning they loaded the wagon and made the journey down the mountain into town. Eureka was bustling with activity, miners and cowboys and families all conducting business in the bright winter sunshine. The snow had melted from the streets, leaving them muddy but passable. While her parents went to the general store, Violet walked down Main Street, looking in shop windows without really seeing anything. She was so lost in thought that she almost walked past him before her mind registered what her eyes were seeing. Wade stood outside the land office, talking with another man and gesturing at a set of papers spread on a small table. He looked different somehow, more grounded, purposeful. As if sensing her presence, Wade looked up. Their eyes met across the muddy street and everything else faded away. He excused himself from his conversation and walked toward her, and Violet met him halfway, not caring about propriety or who might see. "I thought you were not coming until tomorrow," Violet said breathlessly. "It has only been 11 days. "I could not wait any longer," Wade admitted. "I was going to ride up to your father's claim this afternoon. Violet, I have so much to tell you. I bought the land, the one with the creek and the good grass. I have been making plans, real plans for a house and barn and corrals. And I keep thinking about what it could be, what we could make it together, if you are interested, that is. I know it is fast and I have no right to assume anything, but I cannot get you out of my head and—" Violet stopped his rambling by stepping close and taking his hand. "Show me," she said simply. "Show me the land." They found her parents at the general store and Wade explained his request. James and Martha exchanged a knowing look before agreeing, with the stipulation that they would accompany the young couple as chaperones. An hour later, all 4 of them stood on a slight rise overlooking Wade's new property. The land stretched before them, rolling meadows dotted with pine groves, the creek running silver through the middle of it all. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks still white with snow. It was beautiful, peaceful, full of promise. "This is where I want to build the house," Wade said, indicating the rise where they stood. "Good drainage, protected from the wind with a view of the whole valley. The barn would go down closer to the water, and we could run fences along the natural ridgelines to define pastures." Violet could see it all in her mind's eye, the vision Wade was describing coming to life. She could picture a house with a wide porch, chickens scratching in the yard, horses grazing in the meadows. She could see herself there, waking to this view every morning, building a life in this beautiful place. "What do you think?" Wade asked, and there was vulnerability in his voice, a need for her approval that touched her deeply. "I think it is perfect," Violet said honestly. "I think you could build something wonderful here." "Not me," Wade said, turning to face her directly. "We." "Violet, I know it has only been 11 days, but I have been certain since the moment I saw you on that cliff that my life changed. I do not believe in fate or destiny or any of that, but I believe in what I feel when I am with you. I believe in the future I see when I look at this land and imagine sharing it with you." James cleared his throat meaningfully. "Son, if you are saying what I think you are saying, you had better do it properly." Wade took a deep breath and dropped to one knee right there on the muddy hilltop. He pulled a small box from his pocket and opened it, revealing a simple gold band with a single small diamond. "I bought this yesterday in town," he said. "It is not much, but it is what I could afford right now. Violet Emerson, I know this is fast, and I know I do not have much to offer yet except dreams and hard work. But I swear to you that I will spend every day of my life making you happy, building something we can be proud of, being the man you deserve. Will you marry me?" Violet felt tears streaming down her face. She looked at her parents, saw her mother nodding encouragement and her father smiling despite his own misty eyes. Then she looked back at Wade, this brave, honest, hard-working man who had risked everything to save her and was now offering her everything he had. "Yes," she said, her voice ringing clear and sure across the empty land. "Yes, I will marry you." Wade slipped the ring onto her finger and stood, pulling her into his arms. He kissed her there on the hilltop, with her parents politely turning away to study the creek, and Violet felt like her heart might burst from the joy of it all. This was right. This was exactly where she was supposed to be. They were married 6 weeks later in the small church in Eureka. It was a simple ceremony attended by the town's residents, miners from the surrounding claims, and cowboys Wade had worked with over the years. Violet wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit, and carried wildflowers that Wade had picked that morning. When they exchanged vows, promising to love and cherish each other through all the trials life might bring, there was not a dry eye in the church. James gave them a generous wedding gift, enough money to start building the house immediately. Wade hired a crew and worked alongside them, determined to have at least a basic structure finished before winter. They lived in a tent on the property through the spring and summer, cooking over an open fire and sleeping under the stars. It was hard work, but Violet had never been happier. She learned to cook over the fire, improving steadily until Wade declared her meals the best he had ever tasted. She helped mix mortar and carry water, holding boards steady while Wade hammered them in place. At night, they would sit by the fire and talk about their plans, about the horses Wade would catch and train, about the children they hoped to have someday, about the legacy they would build together. The house was finished by October, just a few rooms for now but solid and well built, with the wide porch Violet had imagined. Wade carved their initials over the front door, WM and VM, with the date 1882. They moved in on a crisp autumn evening and christened each room with laughter and love, making the empty house into a home. Winter came again, but this time Violet was safe and warm, with Wade beside her. They spent the dark evenings planning the next year's work, reading aloud to each other, and learning the rhythms of marriage. There were challenges and adjustments, as there always are when two independent people learn to share their lives. But underneath it all was a foundation of love and respect that made every obstacle surmountable. In the spring, Wade caught his first wild horses, a small band of mustangs that he gentled with patience and skill. He sold 3 to the army post for good money and kept 2 mares for breeding stock. The ranch was beginning to take shape, becoming the working operation they had envisioned. That summer, Violet discovered she was pregnant. The news filled Wade with a joy so intense it frightened him. He became almost overprotective, trying to keep Violet from doing any heavy work. She tolerated it for about a week, before sitting him down and firmly explaining that she was pregnant, not fragile, and that she would continue doing her share of the work until her body told her otherwise. Their son was born in February of 1884, during another winter storm that reminded them both of how they had met. Wade delivered the baby himself when it became clear they could not reach the doctor in time, his hands gentle and sure despite his terror. When he placed the squalling infant in Violet's arms, both of them were crying with relief and joy. They named him William James Morrison, after Wade's father and Violet's. The baby had Wade's gray eyes and Violet's dark hair, and he was the most perfect thing either of them had ever seen. James and Martha came to visit as soon as the weather permitted, and the proud grandparents spent a week spoiling their grandson and helping the exhausted new parents. The years flowed by, marked by seasons of work and growth. Wade's reputation as a horse breaker grew, and he had more business than he could handle. The ranch prospered, with good grazing and steady income from horse sales and eventually cattle. They added rooms to the house as the family grew. A daughter named Virginia arrived 2 years after William, followed by another son named Henry 3 years later. Violet started a small school on their property, teaching their own children and those of neighboring families. She proved to be a gifted teacher, patient and creative, instilling in her students a love of learning. Wade built a separate schoolhouse, and what had started as a few children gathered around the kitchen table grew into a proper one-room school with 15 pupils. Through it all, their love deepened and matured. The intense passion of those early days transformed into something richer and more enduring, built on shared work and shared dreams, on children raised and challenges overcome. They had arguments, of course, moments of frustration and misunderstanding, but they always came back to each other, remembering the cliff and the cave, remembering how they had saved each other in more ways than one. On their 10th anniversary, Wade surprised Violet with a photograph he had commissioned. It showed the cliff where he had found her, taken from the exact angle where he had first spotted her trapped on the ledge. The photographer had captured it in winter, with ice coating the rocks and snow all around. Wade had it framed and hung it in their bedroom, a reminder of where their story began. "Why would you want to remember that terrible day?" Violet asked, though she was touched by the gesture. "Because it was the day my real life started," Wade said simply. "The day I stopped drifting and found my purpose. That cliff gave me everything that matters." Violet wrapped her arms around her husband, resting her head against his chest where she could hear his steady heartbeat. "No," she said softly, "you gave me everything. You risked your life for a stranger. You climbed through ice to save me. You carried me down safe. "And you gave me a reason to stay," Wade replied, kissing the top of her head. "You gave me a home, a family, a future. We saved each other, Violet." That is what makes it a good story. By the time their children were grown, the Morrison Ranch had become one of the most successful operations in Northern California. William took over the horse breeding program, proving to have his father's natural gift with animals. Virginia married a doctor in Eureka and opened a clinic, but she never forgot the values her parents had taught her about helping others. Henry partnered with his grandfather James in expanding the mining operation, showing a knack for business that served him well. Wade and Violet grew old together on their hilltop, watching sunsets from the porch they had built together over 40 years before. Wade's hair went silver and his hands, once torn and bloody from climbing a frozen cliff, grew gnarled with arthritis. Violet's dark hair turned white and laugh lines deepened around her eyes. But when they looked at each other, they saw the young people they had been, the cowboy and the woman on the cliff, forever frozen in that moment when they chose each other. On their 50th anniversary, the whole family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. 3 children, 11 grandchildren, and 2 great-grandchildren filled the house with noise and laughter. A party was held in the barn, with music and dancing and speeches that made Wade uncomfortable with their praise. But it was later that night, after everyone had gone to bed and the house was finally quiet, that the real celebration happened. Wade and Violet sat on their porch, wrapped in a quilt together, watching stars wheel overhead in the vast Montana sky. "You have any regrets?" Violet asked, a question they had never asked each other in all these years. Wade thought about it seriously, as he thought about everything. "Not a single one," he said finally. "Every choice I made led me here to you, to this life we built. How could I regret anything about that, even the hard times?" Violet pressed. "The drought of '93 when we almost lost everything. The winter William had pneumonia and we thought we would lose him. All those difficult moments, especially those," Wade said firmly, "because we got through them together, because they made us stronger, because they mattered, Violet. Every moment of our life together has mattered." Violet smiled and squeezed his hand, feeling the bones beneath the weathered skin, remembering when those hands had literally carried her to safety. "I love you," she said. "I have loved you since the moment you appeared at the bottom of that cliff, since I saw you start climbing without hesitation. I loved you before I knew your name." "And I love you," Wade replied, his voice still strong despite his years. "I loved you when you trusted me enough to put your arms around my neck and let me carry you down. I loved you in the cave, when you cleaned my wounds so gently. I loved you on the hilltop when I asked you to marry me. I love you now, and I will love you forever." They sat together in comfortable silence, 2 souls who had found each other against all odds, who had built something beautiful and lasting from a moment of danger on a frozen cliff. Their children and grandchildren slept peacefully in the house behind them, living proof of the love that had started with a desperate rescue in winter. When they finally went to bed, Wade helped Violet up the stairs they had climbed together countless times. They settled into the bed they had shared for 5 decades, in the room with the photograph of the cliff on the wall. Wade wrapped his arms around Violet, holding her as he had held her that terrible, beautiful day when their lives intertwined. And in the morning, when they woke to another dawn on their ranch, they would do what they had always done. They would work together, laugh together, love together. They would tend the land they had built from nothing, welcome the family they had created, and give thanks for the storm that had brought them together. The cowboy and the woman from the cliff had found their happy ending, but it was not an ending at all. It was a beginning that stretched across decades, across generations, a love story that would be told by their descendants for years to come. A story of courage and trust, of risks taken and promises kept, of a man who climbed through ice to save a stranger and found his soulmate instead. Years later, long after Wade and Violet had passed peacefully in their sleep within months of each other, their great-grandchildren would stand on that same hilltop and look out at the ranch their ancestors had built. They would tell the story of how it all began, of the winter storm and the cliff and the cowboy who risked everything for love. And they would understand that the greatest legacy Wade and Violet had left was not the land or the buildings or even the family name, but the example of what two people could build when they chose love over fear, when they climbed through whatever obstacles stood in their way to reach each other, and never let go. The Morrison Ranch still stood, a testament to that love, a reminder that the best stories never truly end but continue in the hearts and lives of those who come after, carrying forward the courage and devotion of those who came before.